There we go. All right, good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome everybody to the City Council Legislative Committee, the last of the year. It is Wednesday, December 22nd. It is approximately, it's close to 9 o'clock. So we'll do roll call first. And it would be Councilor McEachern.
Here.
Councilor Trace.
Here.
Councilor Kennedy. Mike.
Esther.
About that here.
Okay, yeah, and Jerry's here, so we are all present. Just want to go through one formality. We have approval of the minutes from the October 8th, 2021 minutes. We're looking for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion, for a second.
Second, sorry.
Any discussion on that? Do a roll call, please. Councilor McEachern,
Yes.
Councilor Trace,
Yes.
Councilor Kennedy.
Yes,
Chair votes yes. All right, moving along to item 3, discussion. Newly, sorry, that one, elect Mayor Ekron attended a meeting with me on Zoom, which I'm hoping he will continue going to. It's something that I guess the cities of New Hampshire pride themselves on, that we've been able to get a lot done together rather than trying to go and do things. Jane Farini has said a few times to me that it makes her job a little bit easier to be able to know what other communities are thinking, what we're allocating for. So the first thing on here were several things as far as the discussion, taking up the discussion of the mayor, the legislation discussed at the roundtable, decrease of the rooms and meals tax. There's a bill that's out there that would increase the percentage up to the 40%, but there's a backlash on it where it actually, the percentage of the tax would actually decrease over a period of time. It's not originally the intent of what it was. I mean, everybody, I think, now knows that they upped, and we got 30% for the first time in over 10 years since that had been allocated, and we saw a $500,000 increase. The thing that I was impressed with that being during COVID, so it was a slow start for everybody, and the governor had gone and decreased from 9% to 8.5%. So he did a decrease. We did pretty well. $500,000 came into our city. Others, the same type of a thing. So it was good movement. Just don't know if the movement enacting this right now would be the best course of action. It would probably decrease. At least that's the theory. And again, it's only a theory they're making because I don't think that they can actually have a real background and statistics showing as far as what the losses would be. The last time that we had a normal year was 2019. That if you were going to do a study or be able to really show some statistics on that, you would do it based on that, not in a period of flexibility, which obviously we're probably going to be going through into the winter and early spring months, hopefully coming out sooner rather than later. So that was just one of the bills. Another one was the property tax exemption regarding communication service leases. Again, these are a combination of LSRs, which is the Senate bills, and then the HB being the legislative bills. Requiring hand marked paper ballots was one, and abolishing fluoride. And my son went through a phase where he didn't really brush his teeth, and it was probably later teens and the early going in. Was sometimes the only way that he got fluoride. Not all communities do it, of course, but this is one of them. And I think the communities altogether believe, at least in the cities, believe that we should continue as far as doing the fluoride treatment. So it'll be something we be monitoring. Limiting the authority of city council. And this comes down to mandates, which we're getting into now, and limiting health officers. Prohibiting recipients of the state and local grants, appropriation from use, such as funds for lobbying, Trying to think, Jane. Jane's got all the down, gonna be LSRs. I don't have any.
What would be an example of that?
Example of what?
I think it's like earmarking, so if you get a particular grant money, whatever those sums are,
Right,
you could not use that money for lobbying purposes. And I think I have a draft of the bill, hold on a sec.
So the one that, yeah, from a standpoint, if the police wanted to lobby for a certain thing, they would not be allowed.
okay, so that's a good example, I just needed an example, so if you have the police department and they get certain funds or whatever kind of funds that are intended to be used for one thing, and suddenly you find them using the funds to lobby for a new police station or something.
But I think
Got it.
even more than that, lobbying is defined as, you know, speaking on behalf of the bills, correct? Like you wouldn't be able, if you were receiving, this is not just municipalities, many
Entity. Right,
entity received money from federal funds or state funds, they would be prohibited from speaking on behalf of them in front of the.
Got it, yeah,
and I think the other piece of this,
conflict of interest,
if I'm remembering correctly, is it can't be like, you know, it has to be physically separated. So I think it would create some accounting issues as well as far as, you know, earmarking those particular funds. I also wanted to just ask the mayor, and because I think we had this conversation, that the property tax exemption and the paper ballots and the fluoride, that's something that the mayor's group is opposing.
Correct,
Just wanted to clarify.
correct. It did, and that's what some of the stuff is. I didn't see the housing bill ones that we had gone through. There were, again, I'm looking at it. House Bill 1080-68, 1087, and 1098. Those would be-
See them. No, what were they
So
relative to?
those three things, and Declan knows with that. So these were housing concerns. One of them being imposing
Building
by
codes
right.
for tiny houses.
Would be for a tiny house, that any person around the state of New Hampshire would have the right to put one in. We would have no real standing on that. Lot coverage was another one, that the state would go and dictate what a lot coverage meant, so we would lose our right as municipality to be able to go and dictate what we felt. I mean, I don't think it's as big of a challenge here as in Portsmouth, but I know there's in like Greenland and Ryan, something like that, where towns have actually started to work backwards. Greenland actually had a rule where you could actually take a single family home, and on any single family home, you could put a duplex on. They closed that door. Did not want that expansion. And then another one with the state, there's legislation there that municipalities would not be able to dictate or control project restrictions on any given project as well. So every community is different, but I got, these are ones that I guess municipalities don't want to lose their choices, their mayors. So definitely would be speaking against that. Then there was one, 1494. That was an exemption from being able to collect from utilities in right of ways. So communications and stuff like that would no
Right.
longer be, the municipalities would be getting taxes from that.
what's the story with the state appropriations to fund the water system and wastewater projects? And how does that relate to Portsmouth, considering we just went through a major wastewater treatment program? Now, what is the percentage that they want to increase the appropriation of funds?
My recollection is this one is just bringing forward those already on the list. Is that your recollection
We
as
have the
well?
ability, there's, I mean, because we're still upgrading ours, I mean, it's an ongoing thing, and it was funding that we want to make sure that we have sources to be able to.
Yeah, I mean, we've got 45 million for Ps allocated on that proposed CIP, and the question is, well, my first question, which I don't have to worry about, but Declan might have to, is where is Lonza in all of this?
That
the
is,
largest expansion in the history, and suddenly we're paying 45 million for an expansion of fees?
I think, Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a placeholder. We feel more comfortable about that number than we did from the previous placeholder, but what remains to be worked out is the split between the city and Lonza. Right now, I heard 55-45, and I can't remember which side had 55 versus 45, but that is something Suzanne and Terry are working out with Lonza's.
And the other question that I would have and would be very vocal about as a resident is how much does that $45 million appropriation out of fees affect the average taxpayer in Portsmouth with your sewer rates? Because that's where it'll show up. It won't show up in your taxes, but it will show up
Ratepayers.
in the ratepayers. And I don't think it's, we had the chance to say to Lonza as much as they may be a valuable neighbor, we had a chance to say either no, or you will be a contributing partner to this. And there were crickets.
I guess, excuse me,
Yep.
my question would be, I agree with everything Counselor Trace said. We know for a fact that no citizens, except for a little bit of Greenland, goes to that plant, so it's all commercial. So my question is, in the bill from the state, this is I guess for Jane, my question is, can a commercial entity apply for the funding? We know the Peace plant is all commercial. So can a commercial, or is that bill just for residential? Because when I looked at it, I thought it was just for residential. And I don't know if that can be distinguished. So maybe someone could answer that. Thank you.
I can circle back on that question. I don't know specifically, but I do recall that the list that's populated is set by municipalities getting on the list for these particular projects. I don't know if a commercial entity can do that and whether another bill would be required to allow that, but I can research that. To get back
Well,
to,
that bill,
on these two bills though, the HB 412 is appropriating to the DES the sum of $500,000 as a non-lapsing for purpose of funding public water systems. So that's public, eligible for state and federal assistance. So that one seems to be narrowly tailored to public water systems.
So all it is $500,000.
Right, then the other
I mean,
one,
I realize every $500,000 counts.
well, I guess I can, oh, sorry.
DES is notorious for not having any money.
correct. And then the next one, House Bill 398, that one has more, it's similar language, but it's appropriating $5,735,248 for the fiscal year ending June 2023, and $6,919,115 for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2024, which shall be non-lapsing for the purpose of funding eligible wastewater projects. So that one was, the first one was public water systems, the small amount, and then the larger is the broader. And my recollection, I could be wrong on this, and this is Brian Getz is the one that tracks all this stuff for the city, is that these lists are populated and then there's never money to fund them. So you kind of go down this rolling list on already submitted projects, and that what these appropriations are attempting to do is to fund those lists as best as I.
Clear the backlog.
Yeah, as best as I can recall, but I'll certainly double check to see if not these funds, other funds, whether or not a private entity can apply for these kinds of state funds.
Well, two things that I would add. One is, if we're not on the list, I know what he's talking about, the list, then we should, I presume that we are, because I think we were on the list way back for the Pierce Island plant, which we know is not totally completed. But also, if we can always do an attachment, have one of our reps do an attachment and add commercial entities to that bill, because it hasn't gone through yet.
So in both of those, actually, there is supposed to be a session meeting, January 5th or 6th. Still hasn't been narrowed down if those, that's actually going to, that was actually going to be a session that was actually going to take place after the first of the year.
The session was going to be,
Because these are retained bills.
Correct.
So this bill was left over. So they're obligated to vote on these the first week of the session or they die.
got it,
So this is a carryover.
okay.
And then just to kind of summarize as far as some of the other things, bills, things that were concerns of the 13 mayors of the city of Portsmouth, there was HB 1268. Was one they had great concerns with. Limitation of health officers 1272. Trying to think.
I can speak to that, Mayor.
Yep.
So the detail on those two, limitation of the authority of city councilors. We have in our ordinance of powers as a municipality, the ability to enact ordinances if they're not repugnant to the Constitution. And a lot of towns and cities use that provision in this pandemic to kind of deal with the mask issue. So my understanding of the LSRs or the bills and that is that would limit the authority of a municipality to only enact those ordinances for clear and present dangers. And those ordinances would only be allowed to be in existence for 10 days. And there's similar language for a health officer that whatever their powers would be narrowed to a 10-day duration. So that's probably why it's flagged, because it does limit municipal authority. And as we saw last session, that was kind of the theme, to limit municipal authority, and that seems to be repeating itself in the bills that we're seeing.
One of the other watch bills on it was LSR 2971, which was short-term rentals, prohibiting municipalities from regulating them. And that was a really big concern, because the theory is you go for the short-term rentals, it's going to play havoc on our housing stock. We wouldn't be providing housing that would be a permanent thing to be around. So that's something that they should want to watch. Some of these things are really helpful.
That was an interesting conversation, because we found out their ability that Manchester was behind that. And it was trying to think of the reasons why they would be behind that, and it's possible they want to get more tourism Manchester, and creating opportunities outside of hotels, and kind of revitalize it that way. It would have a completely opposite effect in Portsmouth, as the mayor said, to take kind of hard to look at a one-bedroom place and how much money you could get versus how much money you could get in those same amount of weekends. So if there are going to be, I think there needs to be some regulations on that. There has to be kind of owner-occupied language in there, so that people that do have the ability, to want to be able to, supplement their income for their own house, instead of having people come and invest in properties just to flip to Airbnbs.
Well, we allow it here in Portsmouth, but we have it in our zones. There are zones in the city that allow for an Airbnb.
Sure. Yeah, and I think we have to, we'll have some work to do on that, but I think, we all agree in this room that the state shouldn't be able to say, nothing on that.
This is their first attempt. They haven't bothered with any of the short-term rentals.
But it is interesting, like, like Donna Sissi, are on that, and it's very bipartisan, and that's something that we'll have to definitely watch on. And I think that, that affordable housing slant on that is something that is a pretty strong argument to make, that there should be some regulation on that, and that towns and cities should be able to decide what's best for them.
Absolutely.
if I could have another bill on this same
Sure,
kind of
absolutely.
topic. House Bill 1177, that's single families, a single family home by right could be 4 units. So it's, I don't remember the specific details of that, but my understanding, and this is I think another carryover, and we talked about this very briefly last time. You can have 2 duplexes, you can have, a duplex, an apartment and an accessory dwelling, so it's allowed by right, single family residences to have 4 units. So that's in the same theme of statewide zoning changes and the rule of local authority. The intent, like all of them, I think, is to try to create, workforce housing or create the ability to create more housing stock. But the practical effect can sometimes be really challenging in particular residential neighborhoods. If you were trying, to shoehorn parking and all, the impacts that could have. So I would add that to the mayor's group list. That would be another one, and the cities as well, to watch that one.
That's also the right of the municipality to govern its own particular, here we'll call them wards, but our own neighborhoods. Each neighborhood has its own character. And however well-meaning of the state doesn't need to be big brother.
Well, we have historic district.
Yeah.
So I mean, that would play a role that we would not be able to go and do our own say on what was allowed, so.
Well, the other thing is whether it's the historic district or whether it's Ellen Park. I mean, look at the lovely homes in Ellen Park and tell me that many of them, think of them as 4 units. And then think about where people are going to park. So suddenly you have 4 units, 6 cars, and 1 small driveway. And there goes the lawn, there goes, it's, hate to say it, but it's like there goes the neighborhood.
All right, anybody else have any of those under that section? Anything I missed, Jane?
I don't think you hit them.
Okay, so the next section on there is just a brief discussion on the LSRs regarding legislative issues of interest, erection, funding of barriers, of sound barriers. That's not something that have any of our delegates, Peter Song.
Yep, it was Peter Thompson to the LSR that he put forward. So I don't have the details right now. These LSRs continue to populate, and when this was drafted, it hadn't been populated yet, but it could be as we speak. So that's something that I think he was asking for specific funding from the state to erect the sound barriers.
Would that be still for the type 2?
I don't know the detail, but I assumed that was the case. And then the occupancy fee, that would be the hotel occupancy fee, although I think the LSR says a municipal fee, but whatever you call it, the theory is the same, to revisit that issue of whether or not you could put a fee for hotel occupancy.
Yeah, you can't call it a tax, because then that
Correct.
literally shuts everybody
No.
off, and we are not spearheading that.
No,
They've actually got other people that are, we've done it enough, I mean, you keep trying to beat it with other people. We came really close last time. We came really close, they didn't do anything with it last year, so we're in hopes, be able to go and support it. I think at this point, I think any of the municipalities are for that. You'll find that out with the mayors going through, that revenue is a really big thing. They seem to be very supportive of that.
Yeah, can we go back to the Representative Somsich's bill on the funding for sound barriers? My question is, if that's something that can still be added to, we still have the issue of New Franklin School.
But we're at a tier 1, not a tier 2 anymore. State has cataloged that, and that's kind of the funny thing. Portsmouth was the first one to get an application for the type 2, but they had no funding. So when the state came in, they delegated everything from Sherburne for the bridge,
Yeah,
going all the way, the whole 95 corridor. And that is listed as a tier 1. It takes us out of the 2-tier category, and then they justify that within those means of tier one, their data shows that it would need one, so it's another way of them getting out. So the funding thing,
Well,
it's different.
wait a second, with all due respect, sitting there when they came and spoke to
Mhm.
us, they didn't say we didn't need it. They said it didn't, they couldn't justify it because of the expense.
Well,
And the benefit.
the
So-
benefit, the sound,
benefit.
the sound study did not justify the need for it.
The, this, maybe Jane, this is a good conversation to have with you here to try to formulate our best plan. So this is governed by a policy that is approved by the federal highway policies makers. So if we come up with a policy, every state comes up with a policy on how do we do sound barriers. We then get that approved by the feds. I think we're in the middle of the road, maybe, maybe we're the half that make the top half possible when it comes to how stringent we are on sound barriers. Like you go to Maryland, they have a different formulation that puts sound barriers everywhere. But we have our own calculation. As part of that, I think what we need to question the city is how many, what does a school count for in terms of sound receptors? And specifically, because all of these calculations and policies are there to basically make sure they don't give out too much money. How can we kind of shoehorn New Franklin, which, memory serves me right, has been there since, 1920. How can we make New Franklin that predates the highway, classify in some way? Because right now it's classified as the same, interestingly enough, in the same sort of areas like a cemetery. I learned from our John at DOT, and I think that's it's a pretty interesting distinction that a school and a cemetery fall in the same categories in terms of kind of sound, receptors.
It's on a 24 basis, nobody lives there, it's period,
Yeah.
it's justified by the time.
That's right, but there's still, and I think as COVID, has presented, kids being outside is a good thing. We should want them to be outside more, for a whole reasons that are not even COVID, but, moving classrooms outside, I think people realize, oh yeah, being outside is good for kids. So that's not really possible in New Franklin because of the noise there. But if we can focus in on the policy, and the policy hasn't been updated, but if we could ask our legislative delegation to focus in on that,
Yeah, exactly.
I think, there's a chance, and I hopefully narrowly enough for a school that predates the, existence of a highway. There's not gonna be a ton of those schools there, but that would be the, one way to try to get New Franklin.
Yeah, but-
Yeah,
I guess my question is, and I asked it at the last meeting I testified at, since I testified at all of them, was what's the formula? How do we get the formula? When was the formula created? They gave us the data points. What you just said, Daglin, is what they told us at that meeting. But they gave us the data points, but no one has given us a formula. And I've yet to receive it. And I forgot about that I had asked that. So I'm going to go after it. I guess my also question is, and this is a question for Karen, in testifying at all these meetings, no one from the city came to testify. It was a counselor, yes, or maybe a abstract from the city, but what are the city officials thinking? Do you guys want to get involved, or what are you thinking?
Using the hearings, because we had planning staff at the
No, I think those are the hearings that choose.
right, Counselor, I don't know, because I wasn't there, but planning staff or Stephanie Casella did go to the Hampton hearing, and we will certainly continue to have a presence.
Well, Beth Monroe actually is a representative from the planning that is
Right,
on
as
there,
well
and
as
she, and Beth was at that one, I think she was at one other, I don't think she was at all of them, but I think she was playing a double role when she was there, so.
I think with all due respect, what Councilor Kennedy is asking is, there may have been representation there, but I think what she's asking is staff they willing to take a more vocal, proactive kind of, sitting in the audience, Janet Stevens and the crew up front don't have a clue
No,
who
right,
somebody is in the back.
It's my understanding Stephanie did speak, and we are careful to tailor our comments to make sure they're consistent with the folks that are, but we'll continue to do that.
But you can still make a stance. That one, I mean, you can make a stance too. I mean, Councilor Kennedy and I, and Lily made the argument that the money is approved from the infrastructure. It's there, they are shovel ready. They have plans, 9 locations along the 95 corridor, DOT had got it recognized. If the argument can be made and whether it can be pushed into a political thing. There is re-election that's coming up next time around. At that school, if you make that #1 school.
Sheriff Peter sounds such a great idea, having a bake sale up there, trying to sell, to raise it's $300 million. I found out it's $3 million to build that. So if the kids can go out there and try to, raise money for a bake sale, we get MUR down there, I think that's a good idea.
With any of that, I mean, and you make the arguments, because one of the things that we noticed that was on there was it was an unrealistic term. Every one of the barriers that they were proposing, the entity was proposing with 25 foot. I know I've driven a lot of places, Esther does a lot of places, there are barely almost none of 25 foot walls. You had to get into Manchester by the airport where the plant was so big, and I've taken a couple of trips to Manchester lately. And it really was, it's an unrealistic term. And their formula that Esther is talking about was a 20-year outlook. I don't like that 20-year outlook, because I guarantee they reduced everything, noise, sound, emissions, with the projection that there'll be fewer gasoline vehicles and they'll be electric, and the argument will be made that the electric won't be as noisy as a gas car. But they never, like Esther said, they never tell you the formula.
Well, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
First of all, I was at every meeting. The only
Yeah.
person from the city that testified was Bren, and she testified on transportation for elderly. So no one from the city has testified at any of the meetings. But with that said, I would request the city to help us get that formula that was devised according to DOT last year.
Mhm.
That formula was updated last year. That's what they said at the last meeting, the meeting down in Hampton. And so I would request that the city help us get that formula, or the next council that formula, because I'm hoping the next council, I'm sure Dagan will and Kate will continue this, will continue working at getting these sound barriers. But we've gotten close. I think we should be commended. Everyone should be commended, because we did get, so far, we got something, which we never had before. But to get New Franklin, we got to figure out that formula, because that's what they keep going back to, of why New Franklin isn't getting sound barriers. It's some formula that they have yet to produce. Thank you.
Well, obviously, you, Councilor Kennedy and the mayor, you were very vocal and present during all those meetings and actively represented the position of the city. Moving forward relative to staff involvement, maybe it's something that the legislative subcommittee can, have as an agenda piece, not just tracking legislation, but add on as a piece, this sound barrier issue. My recollection of the formula is also based on kind of frontage, right, for the school. And so the takeaway from this meeting is to try to work with our delegation to clarify how that formula gets created and to challenge that in a narrow way. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I would say, I think that's encompasses of what I said with the, challenging in a narrow way. And I think, including the formula in that as a part of the policy that's enforced by the formula, as Councilor Kennedy said, I think is good to be able to see, the formula. In my conversation with John and Eric Anderson, I think came away with a similar one. When they reduced it, they were also reducing the this could be, years out, but they were reducing the reduction in noise. So I think it'd be good to to see that, and I think, Justin Richardson, private citizen, is also, spent some time looking at ways that we could, test that in other ways and challenge, and I think we should, trust DOT, but verify, that there is something that they, it's done another way to look at this, specifically in a way that, where it could be, potentially a political issue with kids, going to school.
There's still are some questions that are coming up, so we could still make the argument, legislative wise, we could make the argument, and resident will make the argument. I think they're still going to do that. Justin Richardson being one, because they are going to move forward in 2023 with the expansion of these breakdown lanes, and that it's 4 years later that they put that, and still make the argument that we've been here before multiple times because it's more expensive. So I think we should still advocate or still qualify for a lot. This is like, I'm not laying down across the time to protest, but I'll stand. So. All right.
Yeah, I think, can I just say one more quick thing? I think this is the time that the new council has to strike on this because of that expansion. But one thing we heard when we were with the governor, we gave the whole plans that we got from a pretty good source on how this should look. We gave him a whole portfolio when we met with him. But the one thing we have to push is, or we heard across the board, is our delegation has to get involved. We heard it from Executive Councilor Stevens. We heard it from others that they haven't heard peep from our delegation on this topic. So as a legislative committee, I would hope that we could get to the delegation to get more involved, speak up, send letters as senators and representatives. That would be great. Thank you.
All right, then the other one that was on there was the additional resource revenue from municipalities of motor vehicle registration. Bill that Senator Quokka has gone and worked on. There is a write-up on there, description of the bill. And it's basically upping our registration fees on vehicles where we're at $5 now. And she's making the case to go to 15 in hopes of being able to back down to the 10. The theory was, if you went to the 10, you'd probably only get 7 or whatever. So she has a couple of supporters on that as well, and I would hope that we would continue to support her on that. I'm pushing, I was pushing as hard with the mayors to try and do that as another revenue stream. And sources was they basically downloading so much onto municipalities. And then the final one that we had gone and talked about was motor vehicle fines, be able to get a percentage of it. And I have promised all the mayors, regardless, I will be at the forefront of that, because I'm the biggest one in the room, apparently. At least I was, I mean, Degman once.
What did they say? What did the mayor say on that? I wasn't there for those meetings, actually.
So at this point, anything, I mean, would be better than nothing kind of thing. But with downshifting going on, with everything, was trying to figure out ideas, and we just started spitballing ideas, and it was one of the ones I held on to. The state of New York is actually, for example, there are many of them where they do a shared thing. It's a 20%. I've been able to talk to a couple of police officers, one that's actually with helps with the unions now in the state of New Hampshire. He kind of gave me a forefront on what the pushbacks would probably be on it. But my argument is, if we're doing that, then it would actually generate more money for them. It's not what people think the money the state uses the money for. It's used for a little bit of everything. And it's used for road infrastructure. They do different things with it, but I think in the long run, if municipalities were doing that, I think it would just be another revenue stream. You know, my example was $75 fine on a faulty stop at a stop sign or running a red light. For that $75, the municipality would see 15. Right now, when our police officers go out there and do that, we get nothing. Nothing. So I think it definitely is a valid argument with pensions, with gas, with vehicle expenditures and everything. That would even be something that would offset some of those fees that the taxpayers pick up, the municipalities would be great. So that one there, and then there is some movement with plastic bag regulations. I don't know if you want to, Jane, speak with any of those.
Yeah, we mentioned that there's two that I've identified so far. One is would mandate restrictions, and the other would be enabling legislation, which would give permission for municipalities to enact restrictions. I'm sure they'll meander through the process, and we'll be watching those. The other one was the remote meetings that affects obviously all of us. And so we'll see what happens there because it impacts all of our public meetings. And then there are several on affordable housing and workforce housing. I think there are about 5 that I identified. The only one referenced here is also has a component of training for planning and zoning boards. I think this resembles the bill that I think Senator Perkins Coker worked on last year.
Yeah.
That has a component of it as well as information relative to workforce housing. So that's another thing that we'll be watching, anything that addresses workforce housing. There's always a lot of right to know bills. You know, we just always have to pay attention, but we typically don't, although the legislative subcommittee could take a position on those. We usually just watch and observe those. One of the things to remember that's coming back is there were some issues about removing immunity for government officials, and that a version of that is coming back. I don't have the detail on that bill, but that's something that you know, we would want to obviously watch. Again, there are some restrictions coming forward on the authority of health officers. We talked about that. Trying to think. Lots of changes on retirement and HR things that we don't usually bother the committee with, but it's something that our HR team obviously needs to watch. There's any other there's obviously a lot of vaccine and masking. There's
There was
just
a couple
a
of them.
lot.
Yeah, HB 1455, 1495, 1351,
Dozens, I think.
mandates and, yeah.
And
there's-
and then, you know, as we discussed earlier, you know, it'll be another challenging session with COVID and how things move forward. On the education funding, we followed up with, you know, Jim Merrill, who's the lobbyist for the coalition communities, to retain bills that would have affected the SWEP issue that we're concerned about. One was voted inexpedient to legislate unanimously. The information we're getting from the lobbying team about what's going on this session is that that's likely not to come forward, given the complexity of all the other issues that are being addressed, that this is not the time to kind of fight the education funding fight. Although funding the education funding is a really important issue, it would be.
They'll take a year off.
It'll be,
They'll take a year off
Yes.
and then bring it up.
and bring it back again. That's what they're hearing kind of from the committee members on.
School credits was one they said that could still possibly pop up.
But the freedom account, you know,
Yes.
there's a billion.
That seems crazy.
There's a billion, not that I exaggerate at all. There are a lot of bills trying to repeal the freedom of education, trying to clarify. Quite frankly, I don't have it all completely, you know, how the mechanics of that works. And so I'll reach out to our lobbying team and have them kind of explain it all to me. But there's every manner of bill that
Thank you.
that is challenging and, you know, questioning how this works, and it's going to be another huge fight in the legislature. But how we fund education insofar as the formula, I think is probably going to be left alone. But this particular freedom account is ripe for lots of discussion. I think those were the major issues.
Okay. And then the next item on there, just update coalition communities 2.0.
Yeah, that was the
Yeah,
education
that was the
stuff.
education,
Yes.
so I guess my recommendation, Diane, was the bills are already there. Senate has formulated theirs, reaching out to Senator Quokka.
see some of the ones there. I told you I would volunteer my time to still go and speak for any of the ones. Some of my push for, so I'd be more than happy to help.
Happy to have you there, Rick.
So, and hopefully, you'll join us. We have one more gathering for mayors, on the 18th. It'll be in Concord. It's a restaurant, according to,
Look forward to it.
yeah, so it's actually on my birthday too, so it was kind of a little treat.
Can I say something about the education bills?
Yeah.
Sure.
I know Jane is right, there's massive bills, but I do hope we kind of keep track of some of them are really trashing teachers.
Yeah.
And I know, and I would just hope that the city could, or even, I guess I'm not sure, I'm never quite sure with this legislative committee, how much of it happens at city level, how much of it happens at school level, and who does what, but with the trashing of teachers that is taking place, I would hope the city could step forward with a letter, especially stuff just came out today, with a letter or some kind of support for our teachers and send it to these bills that are being trashed, where teachers are being trashed. Now, I know we ended up in national news as educators because we were, we're going to fight back some of them. But I guess I would just request that as these bills pop up, if we could even just send a positive letter of support for our educators, that would be helpful. I think one of the reasons the school funding is dropping down is because all this other chaos is happening. And who wants to go after school funding and trash teachers more? So I guess we know the bills are out there. I know other communities are working really hard and sending letters of support for their educators. And I don't know if that would come from the school board or if that would come from our city council, but I would hope going forward that would happen more readily in this turbulent time for education.
I would just
Thank
have two suggestions to help with that. One would be bring this up the mayor's group as well. That might be it's a very powerful group to respond. And when all the mayors in the city support, teachers and would do maybe a joint letter like we did last year on a lot of things. The other issue would be as a legislative principle, the new legislative subcommittee will be looking at those. We didn't adopt the slate last time. If we had or do adopt the slate, then it would be very easy for staff to respond and be able to be more nimble as far as responding to some of these issues. So that could be a topic that could be added to the principles when the legislative subcommittee reviews those and perhaps and hopefully recommends them for council.
And we did joint ones that were with the schools from last year, that one. So what we did basically was I would contract the superintendent. There would be language that we shared, as mayors, we'd go back to our school departments, using Steve, he would read over any of the letters that were being proposed, anything added or taken away from it. If he supported that it would be, that's a very simple thing to do. We want to wholeheartedly endorse using that. And New Hampshire municipality was a really good resource for us too. They see a lot of things that could harm and hurt, and they'll tell us right up front what we should be looking for. So you've got a lot of resources to be able to do stuff like that. So, all right. So there's nothing else. The only recommendation, if you can, while you can, I would try and get your legislators together and who your picks are going to be, so you have 3 counselors. That will be, at least that's always going to make up of who will be. Kate Cook said she had some background experience in that. I don't know if you made decisions on all of that.
Close. Close.
I think everybody's anxiously waiting on that. Anything else? If there's nothing, I just want to thank everybody for 2 years.
It's been a pleasure.
With all of this, I got into something I never absolutely thought I would dream of getting into legislative wise, but it does intrigue me a little bit. I'm not giving anything away as far as maybe something later down the road, but it definitely piqued my interest a little bit. So, with that being said, we look for much of
So moved.
Second.
Russ McGacker,
Yes.
Counselor Trace,
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy,
Yes, and Merry Christmas, everyone.
Christmas,
Merry
sister.
Christmas.
the chair votes yes.
Drive safe.
Thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe and have a happy